Some deaths are accidents. This one was a choice, 100 small choices. You think danger announces itself with thunder, collapsing mountains, or a sky going black. But glaciers are patient. They wait beneath blue skies, beneath laughter, beneath the confidence that comes from standing somewhere thousands of people have stood before. They do not argue when you dismiss a warning. They do not care how many people are watching your camera, how perfect the light is, or how close you think you are to the shot you came for. Every step across ancient ice is a negotiation with forces that have been moving long before you arrived. The glacier always keeps its own schedule, and when yours no longer matches it, there is rarely time to renegotiate. These are the warnings they ignored. This is preventable. 2 cameras, 1 glacier. Nora Kessler and Priya Dale built their careers on being somewhere beautiful. For 6 years, they had turned other people's landscapes into their own livelihoods. A waterfall in the Philippines, a salt flat in Bolivia, a sea cave in Portugal, each one reduced to 15 seconds of color and motion, and a caption asking followers to imagine themselves there too. Their combined following ran into the hundreds of thousands. Brands paid them to travel. Travel paid them to keep moving. Neither of them had ever had a reason to stop and ask what happens when a landscaper refuses to cooperate. That summer, they planned their most ambitious production yet, a Pride-themed shoot on Alaskan ice, timed deliberately to the season, engineered from the first pitch email to be shared everywhere at once. The concept was simple on paper: rainbow fabric against blue glacial ice. 2 women in love framed against something ancient and indifferent to love entirely, though neither of them would have put it that way at the time. They imagined the metaphor before they had ever set foot on the thing itself. For Nora and Priya, their dream Alaska shoot would be a tragedy. They landed in Anchorage carrying 4 camera bodies, 2 drones, a shot list broken into golden hour blocks, and a confidence that had never once been tested by consequence. Neither of them had walked on a glacier before. Neither of them thought that mattered. They had summited overlooks in Peru without incident. They had hiked volcanic ridgelines in Iceland and posted about the wind. To them, ice was simply another backdrop, another location to check off a growing list that had never once ended in tragedy. And so, by the quiet logic of experience without consequence, seemed unlikely to start now. It would end in tragedy this time, the perfect shot. The guide met them at the trailhead a little after 9 in the morning, in the flat gray light before the sun had fully cleared the ridgeline. His name is not preserved in this account because his role in the story matters more than his identity. He had led groups onto Matanuska Glacier for 11 seasons. He had watched hundreds of visitors walk onto the ice believing they understood it, and he had learned season after season exactly how little that belief was worth. He gave the safety briefing he gave every group in the same order, using nearly the same words each time, because repetition was the only defense he had against people hearing what they wanted to hear instead of what he was actually saying. Stay on the marked route. Walk exactly where he walked. Not beside him, not ahead of him. Never move off to the side for a better angle, no matter how good the light looked from where they were standing. Turnaround time was 2:30 in the afternoon, without exception, regardless of how far the group had traveled or how much footage remained unfinished. He said the words without exception slowly, the way a person repeats something they expect to be tested on. Nora and Priya listened the way most people listen to a briefing they believe they have already heard some version of. Polite, present, already thinking 2 steps ahead toward the first shot of the day. They had done river crossings in Southeast Asia, descended into lava tube caves in the Azores, stood on exposed ridgelines above treeline in weather they later admitted, laughing, had been a little much. This felt to both of them like a formality. A liability script recited before the real adventure began. The kind of warning tour companies gave so that nobody could later say they hadn't been told. The guide said one more thing before the group started walking. Something he did not read from a laminated card. Something that came instead from 11 seasons of watching ice change its mind. He told them the glacier was alive. Not dead weight, not a frozen sidewalk laid down once and left in place, but a body of moving mass, compressing, cracking, breathing meltwater through channels that open and close within the same afternoon. He told them the safe path today might not be the safe path tomorrow, and that even the safe path this morning might not be the safe path by 3 o'clock the same day. It sounded to Nora and Priya like poetry, something atmospheric to remember later, maybe even to use in a caption. It was not poetry, it was the first and easiest place this story could have ended differently, offered freely at no cost, before either of them had taken a single step onto the ice. What they heard as routine liability language was, in reality, the first opportunity to stop the chain before it began. The glacier doesn't negotiate. Matanuska Glacier stretches across roughly 27 miles of south-central Alaska, and it is, by reputation, one of the most accessible glaciers in North America. A fact that has made it beloved by tour operators and, just as reliably, fatal to the small percentage of visitors who mistake accessibility for safety. Every season, guides repeat some version of the same warning to new arrivals. This ice is not a stage built for photographs. It is a landscape that happens to allow people onto its surface, temporarily, entirely on its own terms, and it can withdraw that permission without announcing the decision in advance. Beneath the visible surface, the glacier hides crevasses, deep fractures torn into the ice by the glacier's own movement, some barely visible at the top, widening beneath the surface into chambers of darkness that can run 20 feet down, 30 feet down, sometimes considerably more. Snow accumulates over these openings through the winter and compacts into what guides call a snow bridge, a thin, deceptive lid stretched across a hole that, from above, in the right light, can look identical to solid, walkable ground. There's often no visible seam between safe ice and a covered crevasse. The only reliable way to know the difference, more often than anyone would prefer, is to fall through it. The temperature of glacier ice does not track the temperature of the air moving across it. Glacial ice sits near 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of how warm the surrounding summer day feels against exposed skin. A visitor can be sweating comfortably under an August sun, sleeves rolled up, sunscreen on, and still be standing above a surface cold enough to become lethal within minutes if it gives way and drops them into the water pooling beneath it. As the day warms, the danger does not decrease. It grows, and it grows in a direction most visitors do not expect. Afternoon sunlight increases surface melting across the ice field, and that meltwater carves and enlarges channels, softens the underside of snow bridges, and destabilizes routes that had been entirely solid at 9 in the morning. This is the counterintuitive fact that has ended more than one trip on this glacier. The soft, warm, golden light that photographers travel across the world to chase arrives at almost the exact hour the ice beneath their boots becomes least trustworthy. This is why guides set turnaround times, and why those times are treated by anyone who has spent real seasons on the ice as absolute rather than aspirational. A turnaround time is not bureaucracy. It is not an attempt to shorten anyone's experience or protect a company's insurance premium. It is a line drawn in the calm of the morning, before fear has any reason to exist yet, precisely because by the time fear finally arrives with a reason attached to it, it is very often too late to act on what it is telling you. Nature had already changed the glacier by the time the group set foot on it that morning. The only question left, the only variable still undecided, was whether the two visitors filming their way across it would change their plans to match a landscape that had no intention of changing its own. 5 more minutes. For the first 3 hours, nothing went wrong, and that is how a great many of these stories begin. Nora and Priya move with the group across the marked route, framing shots inside the guide's designated path, capturing footage he privately considered impressive for two people who had never touched crampons before that morning. The ice held beneath every step. The light, while not yet what they wanted, was workable, and confidence, none earned but comfortable, the kind that accumulates quietly across a day without incident, settled over both of them like something they had simply brought with them from home and never bothered to leave behind. At 2:15, 15 minutes ahead of turnaround, the guide called the group in. He explained, as he always did at this point in the day, that conditions shift fastest in the final hour before departure. Meltwater channels widening, footing changing beneath fresh slush, glare off the surface making it harder to spot the faint discoloration that sometimes, if not always, hints at a hidden crack below. He wanted the group moving back toward the trailhead with real margin remaining, not margin calculated down to the last safe minute. Nora and Priya had one shot left they hadn't captured. A wide frame with better backlight, a section of striking blue ice just off through the side of the marked path, noticed only in the last hour as the sun shifted position. It looked close. It looked like an easy detour, a few extra steps at most. Nothing about its surface looked any different from the ice they had already stood on safely all day, and to them, that similarity felt like evidence rather than coincidence. They asked for 5 more minutes. The guide said no, and repeated patiently but firmly. That 5 minutes on a glacier late in the day was not the same unit of time it would be anywhere else. Not on a hiking trail, not in a parking lot, not on any surface that behaved the way solid ground was supposed to behave. He told them to fall back in line with the rest of the group and continue toward the trailhead. They complied, mostly. But as the group began walking, Priya stepped a short distance to her left, away from the marked route, angling her body for one last frame, before the light she wanted disappeared behind the ridge. It was not a leap over a barrier. There was no rope to cross, no sign to ignore, nothing dramatic enough to register in that instant as a real decision at all. It was the kind of small sideways adjustment that looks, in the moment it happens, like nothing whatsoever. Every decision that came before this one had quietly built toward it. 3 uneventful hours of confidence. The pressure of a shot list that still had one unfinished line on it. The belief, unspoken but persistent since childhood for most people who have never been seriously hurt outdoors, that danger announces itself. That if the ice beneath her were truly unsafe, it would somehow look unsafe, feel different underfoot, offer some warning before it mattered. None of that belief was true. None of it had ever been true anywhere on this glacier. But it had gone untested for 3 straight hours. And an untested belief feels, right up until the exact moment it fails, indistinguishable from a fact. Catastrophes rarely begin with reckless leaps. More often, they begin with one reasonable decision that quietly overrides another. The fall. The snow bridge gave way without warning because that is what snow bridges do. There is no creak beforehand, no visible sag offered as a courtesy, no pause in which the ice announces its own failure before it happens. One instant, Priya was standing on ground that looked entirely solid, camera rays chasing a frame of light that would never be captured. The next instant, the ground beneath her was simply gone, and she was falling into a crevasse she had not known existed until she was already inside it. The fall itself lasted only seconds. What followed did not. Nora reached the edge within moments, calling down into the dark opening, and Priya's voice answered from below, frightened, in pain, but conscious and alive, which meant, for a brief window, that everything still felt survivable. What Nora did not have, and could not conjure by will or panic, was any of the equipment required to actually help her. No rope, no harness, no anchor she knew how to set into moving ice, no pulley system, no technical training in crevasse extraction, none of the specialized knowledge that separates a trained guide capable of pulling a fallen climber back to the surface from a bystander who can only kneel at the edge and listen. The guide reached them within minutes and immediately began the emergency call, relaying coordinates, describing the estimated depth and angle of the fall as precisely as he could from the surface, requesting technical glacier rescue. But rescue of this kind is not fast by design, and it cannot be made faster by urgency alone. Rescuers first have to travel to a remote section of ice. They have to assess the crevasse itself for the risk of secondary collapse before anyone descends into it. They have to rig anchors capable of holding the combined weight of both a fallen victim and the rescuer being lowered to reach her. Every one of those steps takes time that, on the surface, feels unbearable, and below the surface is being measured in a different currency entirely. While that response moved into motion, Priya remained alone in near-freezing meltwater at the base of the crevasse, and her body had already begun a sequence that kills people in cold water far faster than most visitors ever expect. The first stage is called cold shock. Sudden submersion in water near the freezing point triggers an involuntary gasp reflex, followed by rapid, uncontrolled breathing that a person cannot consciously override, no matter how calm they try to remain. Heart rate and blood pressure spike sharply. In the first 60 to 90 seconds after immersion, drowning becomes a genuine risk, purely from the body's inability to regulate its own breathing. A risk entirely separate from swimming ability, from fitness, from willpower. If a person survives that first minute, as Priya did, the next stage begins immediately. Cold water draws heat from the body roughly 25 times faster than cold air of the same temperature. Blood vessels near the skin constrict automatically, redirecting warm blood toward the core and away from the extremities. In a defensive process, the body performs without any conscious input at all. This is why the hands fail first. Within minutes, fine motor control disappears entirely. Fingers stop obeying the signals sent to them. Gripping a rope, gripping an ice ledge, gripping anything at all becomes physically impossible. Not because the will to hold on has weakened, but because the muscles required to hold on are no longer receiving usable instructions from a brain that is rapidly losing heat of its own. As Priya's core temperature continued to fall, the changes that followed were neurological rather than muscular. Clear thought became difficult and then became impossible. Decision-making slowed, then stopped functioning in any reliable way. The instinct to keep moving, keep calling out, keep fighting toward the light above her faded. Not from surrender, not from any failure of character, but from a nervous system that had simply run out of the resources required to sustain that fight. Eventually, even shivering stopped, and shivering's absence is not a sign of improvement. It is a sign that the body has abandoned the fight to stay warm entirely, in order to protect whatever core function it can still preserve. By the time trained rescuers finally reached the site, rigged their systems, and completed the technical descent into the crevasse, the combination of the fall's injuries and the duration of cold exposure had already done what cold water reliably does. Priya was recovered from the ice. She did not survive. By the time professional rescuers were moving toward the glacier, the physics of cold had already begun making decisions no human being could reverse. The rescue that came too late. The investigation that followed this fictional account mirrors the kind conducted after real wilderness fatalities almost every single season across Alaska. There was no villain found inside it. No act of malice, no extraordinary carelessness that separated this particular outing from hundreds of others that end the same day, safely, without incident. What investigators found instead, as they so often do, was a sequence, a chain of individually reasonable choices that, laid end to end and examined afterward in careful order, had eliminated every margin for error the day originally held. The safety briefing that was heard, but not truly absorbed. The turnaround time that existed clearly on paper and was, for a handful of extra minutes, quietly treated as negotiable in the moment it actually mattered. The single step off the marked route that felt, at the time it was taken, like nothing more consequential than a slightly better camera angle. None of these decisions, examined in isolation, look anything like the beginning of a tragedy. That is, according to search and rescue professionals across the state, almost always exactly how it happens. Nobody wakes up in the morning planning to die on a glacier that afternoon. People simply stop treating caution as urgent, one small decision at a time, until the moment finally arrives when caution turns out to have been the only thing standing between them and everything that followed. Nora returned home carrying equipment she has since barely touched and footage she has never released to anyone. The guide, cleared of any wrongdoing by the formal review that followed the incident, continues leading groups onto the same stretch of ice, repeating the same briefing in nearly the same words to new visitors who listen to it the way Nora and Priya once did, politely, attentively even, and only half believing somewhere underneath that attention that any of it could possibly apply to them specifically. Investigations always search for one fatal mistake. Wilderness rarely offers one. You never wake up intending to become a wilderness fatality. You wake up believing you'll come home with photographs, stories, and memories worth sharing with people who weren't there to see it themselves. That is precisely what makes chains like this one so difficult to recognize while you're still standing inside them, still making each individual decision feel small and reversible and entirely your own to control. It could have ended before the guide's warning was dismissed as formality back at the trailhead in the flat gray light of 9 in the morning. It could have ended at 2:30 at the turnaround line drawn hours earlier before anyone needed it to hold. It could have ended the moment a slightly better camera angle asked someone to leave the path that had kept her safe for 3 uneventful hours already. It could have ended with the simple, unglamorous acceptance that the glacier, the mountain, and the weather do not owe anyone a second opportunity, no matter how close they believe themselves to be to the shot they travel thousands of miles to capture. Glaciers do not reward confidence. They reward caution, preparation, humility, and the willingness to walk away when every instinct in the body is insisting there is time for one more frame. The two travelers in this story are fictional, built deliberately from patterns repeated in real wilderness accidents for generations. But the ice they walked on is real, the cold that waits beneath its surface is real, and the decisions that lead people into crevasses like this one are made in exactly this quiet, incremental way by real people on real glaciers most seasons. Remember the two travelers behind the story not for the content they hope to create, but for the lesson their choices leave behind, long after the footage they never finished shooting, because every link in this chain could have been broken. And every step of it was preventable. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing. It might be the cheapest piece of survival gear you ever pick up. Want more preventable? These stories are next. Thank you for watching.